Hi, I'm Jeff Hajek, the owner and founder of Relaction. This video is part of my lean training system. It was originally released as a DVD a long time ago, but times have changed and the look of some of these LTS videos is now a bit dated. The content is still spot on though, so rather than just discontinue the line, I am posting the majority of each of the 36 videos here, with the remainder available at Relaction Videos. That's our video service where you can download a wealth of supporting content and watch subscriber-only videos. I recommend subscribing and hitting the notification button if you want to make sure you don't miss any new content. I would also really appreciate if you would hit the like button if this video is helpful and you want to see more content similar to it. The like button helps us get found on YouTube, but it also lets us figure out where you want us to put our future effort. Now enjoy the free version of this video. Hello, my name is Jeff Hajek. I am the owner and founder of Relaction Continuous Improvement. I'd like to welcome you to this presentation on how to effectively manage change. If this was a live training session, this would be the point where I ask everybody to take out a piece of paper and a pen. I would then give them 15 seconds to sign their name as many times as possible. I would then repeat the exercise and ask people to pay special attention to how, as they get more familiar with the process, it gets easier. Almost invariably, people do better the second time around. Finally, I would do it one more time to really drive home the point that the more a person does a process, the more familiar and fast they become. I would get them started with, on your mark, get set, but I wouldn't say go. Instead, I would stop the countdown and ask everyone to hold their pen up so I could see what they were writing with. At this point, I would ask them to put the pen in their other hand, and then I would say go. There is always a grumbling and a groaning and a murmuring at this point. I stopped this third run just a few seconds into it. The point is made very quickly. In the discussion of the exercise, I asked the trainees to tell me how it felt when they thought they were going to have to write with their opposite hand. That reaction is really at the core of change management. It's all about understanding the underlying feelings people have when they are asked to break a familiar routine and try something new. And it is about knowing how to manage those feelings in a way that makes the person vested in the change rather than want to fight it. That's really what this training is all about. It's about trying to figure out why people respond the way they do and how change affects the thought process that people go through when faced with a decision. In this case, what to do about the change. And from the business perspective, it is about understanding why managing change well is so important, and how to go about doing it effectively. We all understand the concept of change, but something that people don't give a lot of thought to is the fundamental sources of it. Change can come from both internal and external origins. Internal sources of change are things like decisions to have a baby or to go back to school. External sources of change are things that are driven by people living outside of your skull, bosses, political leaders, and the marketplace, for example. In a highly developed continuous improvement culture, people initiate a lot of changes on their own, so there is a somewhat higher than baseline level of internally motivated changes. But when companies are first starting out on a path to improve their operations, employees often don't have a choice about doing business in a different manner. They will likely have a glut of externally initiated changes to deal with. Let's think about the inherent differences between the two types of sources. Because internal changes are self-motivated, people are generally more on board with them than they might be with an external source. Another characteristic of internal changes is that they often originate from new situations. Life has a natural progression of steps, say going to college or getting married or starting a family or something of that nature. Each of these choices drives multiple changes. There's also a lot of change that people go through as they feel more lifetime achievement. People act differently when they're struggling to make ends meet than they do when they feel very comfortable in their lives. That's what I mean when I reference Maslow's hierarchy of needs in the list. People have to put their basic needs first before they can go to higher orders of fulfillment. But once their fundamental requirements are achieved, people often change the way they live their lives. This also works in reverse. When people feel less secure, they also change how they behave. If people are scared for their jobs, don't expect them to initiate many changes. One other important characteristic of internally motivated change is that people tend to be alone in their situation. Not everybody at a company is going to have a baby at the same time. That change only affects the one individual, so there's not a lot of mutual support. Let's compare the internal sources to external sources. External pressures are often environmental. A bad economy, for example, will force changes in the way many people behave. Another source of external change is leadership. When your boss tells you that you're going to be on a continuous improvement team that will be working on a process in your work area, that is an external change. Both crises and opportunities will also be catalysts for change as well. When a competitor suddenly does much better or much worse, there's a good chance that your company will change the way it operates in response. And finally, a major characteristic of externally motivated change is that it is shared by the entire organization. That can be a powerful lever for a leader who understands change well. But if the change is going poorly, that shared experience can make things get worse in a hurry. People will talk about the issues they are facing, and when they are having a hard time, the conversations will be negative. What should you take away from this discussion about the sources of change? Well, you should recognize that change is not an unusual situation. If your boss isn't changing something, you probably are. And if both of you are stable for a while, then the competition, or the weather, or new regulations, or some other unforeseen factor will step in to stir things up. Companies used to be able to sit on their successes for much longer than they can today. But with global competition, if a company is not constantly improving, it is losing ground. I hope you are getting something valuable out of this video. If you want to get more out of this program, we recommend watching it on Valaction Videos. You'll be able to watch the entire video, mostly ad-free, and view subscriber-only programs. You'll also have access to a load of continuous improvement downloads. Now that we know a little more about change, let's talk about why the way it is managed matters. The short of it is that managing change well makes for more satisfied employees. Obviously, this is good for the employee. Everybody wants to be satisfied in his or her job. That is one of those universal truths. I have yet to hear a person say, "I like my job too much. I think I'll go find one that has more drudgery in it." Every person may define what satisfies them differently, but everybody wants more satisfying work. So there's not much argument about job satisfaction being good for the employee. And there's not much argument that managing change well will improve job satisfaction. The question then is why managing change well matters to employers. It matters because there is a strong link between job satisfaction and profit. Satisfied employees don't go looking for work elsewhere, which keeps turnover costs in check. Satisfied employees have less stress, which translates into better health and lower healthcare costs. Satisfied employees also create happier customers. In fact, in a 2003 study, Sears found that increasing employee satisfaction by 5% created a 1.3% increase in customer satisfaction, which resulted in a 0.5% increase in revenue. Overall, a company with satisfied employees is going to have lower costs than one chock full of disgruntled teams. In addition to the benefits of job satisfaction, there is one more significant reason to learn to effectively manage change. The simple fact is that the success of a project is closely linked to the effectiveness of the change management around it. How closely linked? Very closely. A 2009 study found a high correlation between excellent change management and project success. Now, that's not to say that change management is the only factor, of course. But keep in mind that a poorly managed project would be unlikely to be rated highly on change management. On the flip side, though, good project management might not be enough to guarantee success if the affected people aren't brought on board. A 2002 McKinsey study also found similar results to those shown in the chart on the screen. Projects rated as having excellent change management had a 143% return on investment, while those with poor change management only pay back 35 cents on the dollar. And the impact of this linkage between success and change management is only going to grow. The pace of change continues to increase. One more interesting thing about project success. IBM did a study a few years ago in which they found that the top 20% of managers were effective at change management 80% of the time, and the bottom 20% was only effective 8% of the time. Which group is more likely to get the promotion? Fortunately, change management is a skill that can be learned. So what's the takeaway of the last two slides? The second key point is that effective change management makes good things happen, not only for the company, but also for employees and managers within the company. Here's a tip regarding this key point. Because change management is so closely linked to success, it makes sense to monitor it throughout the project. That means building in checks, gates, and milestones. But it also means that leaders need to spend a lot of time where the actual work is being done, commonly called the Gemba in Lean. This keeps them connected with both the new process and how their employees are reacting to the change. Of course, if change management was easy, there probably would not be a term for it, and there certainly would not be a need for this video you are watching. The fact is, most people are resistant regarding change. Actually, a better way to say that is that most people have significant inertia regarding change. They like things staying the same. Think about your favorite restaurant. You probably stick to a few basic menu items you found that you like. If you visit a friend's house and he or she offers you something unusual, you will probably eat it, but it might not be something you'd seek out on your own. So when you think about a project, you have that same clustering in the wait-and-see area. Most people are willing to try something new if they see a bona fide reason for it, but it will take a little nudge to get them moving. There are a few people on either end of the spectrum, though. Some people are always chomping at the bit to try new things, and others will fight tooth and nail to keep things as they are. So as you approach change management, recognize that you're not going to win over everybody. Some people have resistance built into their DNA, and you are unlikely to convince them to change course. But that doesn't mean that everybody is stuck where they are naturally. With effective change management, you can skew the bell curve and make more people become receptive to the particular change in question, and that will help you start to reap the benefits I mentioned earlier.
As part of the Lean training system this video comes from, we offer a variety of Lean Lego training packages. These include our Lean Lego Flow Simulation, Mistake Proofing or Poka-yoke Lean Lego Exercise, and our Visual Controls and 5S Lean Lego Exercise. We've also got an Office Flow Simulation for those not implementing continuous improvement on the shop floor. Click the links in the description below or click on cards that pop up on this video to learn more. We'll also add links at the end.
One of the challenges leaders face when helping people through change is that each person has a different reason why it's hard for them. It might be that they are scared of how things will turn out. They think that their life will get worse when the changes are done. Or it might just be that they're very comfortable where they are and don't see a reason to change. Sometimes they just don't think the change will work. Or they might just like things a different way. People also resist change when they feel like they don't have the skills to be successful under the new way of operating. A bit of a disheartening reason is that some employees don't believe that the company or their boss cares about them. This lack of trust is not just a problem for change management, though. When employees and bosses don't trust each other, all aspects of the work environment are very challenging. People also have a tendency to push back when they're pushed, regardless of whether or not they agree with things. So if a boss comes across as overly assertive, people tend to resist on general principle. The final reason that people resist change is that they just don't see the reason for it. They think things are going well and would like them to stay the same. Now, it is worth noting what is absent from this list. An IBM study identified some of the top barriers to change. The most frequent item on the list was changing mindsets and attitudes. Rather far down the list, and with about a quarter of the frequency of the top item, was lack of motivation. What this means is that if you can inspire people to change, they will have the energy to do it. With a good reason, people will rally around change. There's also one more big reason why people resist change. It's because they get personally vested in the process that they do every day. There are many different psychological strands woven into this issue. But the short of it is that when people link themselves personally to a process, making a change to it implies that there's something wrong with them. So in defending the process, people are really defending their own sense of self-worth. Don't discount the impact of this situation. It is especially pronounced when a person has been the only one doing a job for a number of years. They made the process what it is today, so are likely to feel attacked during a change. But when it comes down to it, all of the barriers I mentioned earlier have one common thread. And this commonality does not apply just to change management. Every conflict comes from one simple underlying situation. They come from a gap in expectations. Simply put, when you recognize and manage that gap well, change goes smoothly. But when you don't, the path gets bumpy in a hurry. So that leads us to our third key point, that emotion trumps logic. Regardless of why people are resisting change, it is an emotional feeling that you can't talk somebody out of. When you try to present all the facts and data behind a new process or explain why the new way will be better, people tune out. They have to see and feel the benefits for themselves. There's an interesting fact related to this key point that comes from a 2009 study about the placebo effect of optimism with pharmaceuticals. The more optimistic somebody was about a drug being effective, the more pronounced the placebo effect. The study showed that the same benefit carries over to leadership. Positive, optimistic leaders, as long as they aren't over the top in how upbeat they are, get better results when managing change. So try to address things in a positive, forward-looking way. Instead of saying, "What's keeping you from supporting this change?" ask, "What can we do to overcome the problems you are facing?" A final point on emotion. People are much less open about what they are feeling than about what they are thinking. When you see things like crossed arms or head shaking when people are saying yes, the emotion is seeping out. Another little clue is when people speak in negatives. That simply means that they say things such as, "I'm not opposed to it," versus "I support it." It's not a hard and fast rule, but it is a flag to watch out for. Despite the various obstacles to change, there's a basic pattern that people follow when they go through a transition. This chart shows what often happens to performance over time as a change occurs. Basically, people cruise along with a steady level of performance, and then something new happens. In this model, the change is related to an improvement. But even though the intent is good, something unusual occurs at the moment of change. Performance tends to dip. This is commonly related to the initial pushback, both in terms of a denial of the need for change and resistance to the change itself. But fortunately, that performance hit tends to be short-lived, and with good change management, the dip is even smaller. At the end of this exploration phase, the new method gets stabilized. But this new steady-state performance is at a higher level than before the change occurred. This chart is intended to show you that it is not going to be smooth sailing as soon as you make a change, even if the change is based on a great idea. You have to anticipate this dip, and you have to take action to help manage your team through the challenges they will face as they progress through denial, resistance, and exploration. And of course, the goal is to come out with a stronger commitment on the far side. The more you keep in mind the needs of the frontline employees, the shallower and shorter this performance dip will be, and the bigger the rise in the steady-state performance.
Get more out of our Lean Training System videos with our Continuous Improvement Companion. It's closing in on 1,000 pages of great content. It is currently available as a download with a subscription to Full Action Videos and as a license through our store. You can also get a free version of it by signing up for our newsletter. Click the links in the description below or click on the cards that pop up on this video to learn more. We'll also add links at the end.
Let's talk in more detail about what happens in each of those phases I just mentioned. In the denial phase, people seldom act. They either think the change won't last, or there is no need for it, or that there will be additional changes before anything gets settled. As a result, they avoid participation. This lack of participation is what causes that initial dip. But once they're sure the change is going to happen, there's often a resistance that forms. Again, this pattern is not universal and it doesn't happen exactly the same way every time. But it is common enough that you should look for these phases when you are managing a change. One of the things that happens during resistance is that people try to rally their team around the cause. Pay special attention when the key influencers within the team don't seem to be on board. The rest of the team will take their cues from these unofficial leaders. The next phase is exploration. People enter this phase for a variety of reasons, whether it is because they decide that resistance is futile or because they see the light. They will start opening up to the change. This exploration is strongest when people start to realize how the change is good for them. That's a theme I've been mentioning repeatedly. As people see more and more opportunity in the change, they will be far more likely to embrace it. The takeaway for the leader is to make sure a project isn't just good for the company. Make sure there's some benefit, a real, valued benefit, in it for the team members. The final phase is commitment. This is when people put the past behind them and accept that they have turned the corner on how work is done. The real benefit of commitment is the focusing of energy. When people are looking forward to the new solution and committing to making things work, rather than looking back at how to keep things the same, their effort is not diluted and the pace of improvement accelerates. Now, the obvious takeaway from knowing these phases is that when you recognize which one people are in, as a leader you can customize your responses to the precise needs of your team at that precise point in time. It takes a lot of effort to do that, but it will go a long way towards making changes go more smoothly. While people generally follow the basic pattern depicted in the previous slide, the speed through which they progress is impacted by a person's general attitude about change or their specific attitude about the change in question. Even a typically resistant person will have some changes that he or she really gets behind. Essentially, the person will fall into one of 4 basic quadrants. And these quadrants are defined by whether or not the person is in favor of or against the change, and whether they are actively or passively doing something about that view. Let's start with the bottom right quadrant, which contains passive supporters. These are the people who are in favor of the change, but are not going to end up being big advocates for it. Next to the passive supporters are the passive resistors. While they are not voicing their opposition to the change they disagree with, they are likely to drag their feet, which makes it harder for a change to conclude successfully. Unlike the passive resistors, though, active resistors will push back against the change. This may be overt, with the person locked in debate against the advocates for change, or it may be a bit more covert, with the person taking a behind-the-scenes resistance. In either case, the person is acting on their disagreement with the basic premise of the change. Finally, we have the active supporters. Obviously, this is a sweet spot for the quadrants. You want people who are in favor of the change and are taking action to make sure the change is successful. So, when you boil it down, change management is really about taking the people from the bottom and left quadrants and moving them to the upper right. The more active support a project has, the more likely that it will be successful. There's one more point I like to make about this chart. There is a common belief that the active resistors are the most dangerous to change. This, however, is not the case. The active resistors are essentially announcing that they disagree, which gives leaders a warning. The obstacle is very apparent. The passive resistors, on the other hand, are dangerous because you don't know who they are. It is hard to distinguish a passive supporter from a passive resistor. Nobody on the team is going to stand up and raise their hand and say, "Hey, keep an eye on me, I'm a passive resistor." You generally find that out the hard way. That's because it can be very damaging to a project to leave a critical step in the hands of a passive resistor. While they would be unlikely to make the project fail on purpose, their lack of motivation to see a successful outcome means that they probably won't put all that much effort into overcoming obstacles, or even letting anybody know about them for that matter. In the last few slides, we talked about how change and resistance look from the outside. Now let's take a look inside a person's brain for a minute and think about the progression that a person goes through from the initial event, in this case the announcement of the change, through the eventual result of the project. Whenever something happens around us, the first thing we do is try to interpret what is going on. We take all the filters, experience, and knowledge we have accumulated over a lifetime and apply them to the evidence we collect. In essence, we add meaning to what we observed. Imagine you are supposed to meet a friend for dinner and they are late. No phone call, no email, no text, just a no-show. You would interpret that event. If the person was historically unreliable, you might assume that you got stood up. If the person was as punctual as the German train system, you might be concerned by the tardiness. In both cases, you've taken information and distilled it down to some theory about the event and came to a conclusion about how it affects you. And that interpretation drives your emotion. If you thought the person just forgot about the dinner, you might become angry or hurt. If you thought the person had some sort of problem, you might be worried. This is a very important realization. Emotion comes after the interpretation. People don't get mad or happy or fearful or hurt because of an event. They experience those emotions because of the interpretation of the event. And that emotion drives the decision-making process. So what you do about that friend who is late generally comes as a result of the emotions you're feeling. If you're angry, you might just leave the restaurant and give your friend the cold shoulder for a few days. If you are worried, you might actively try to find out what happened and see if you could help. The weight that you give the factors of your decision-making process change depending on how you're feeling. So it is generally a good practice to avoid making decisions when angry or when you're experiencing any other strong emotions. The final step before achieving results is taking action. Once you come up with a decision, you have to make it a reality. But keep in mind that doing nothing is actually an action. Not speaking up is a choice. So, in that tardy friend example, if you choose to just continue sitting in your booth, that is an action. And obviously, all the actions you take create results for you. Now this warning probably isn't necessary. We all know that poor decisions lead to poor outcomes. But something to consider, though, is how a person defines good, or who actually does the defining. If a person does not like the change, they may see complete and utter failure as a good thing. Or, a person may get a short-term benefit with a long-term cost. A college kid choosing to go to a concert instead of studying for midterm would fall into this category. The key here is to recognize that most people don't shoot for a bad outcome. They try to achieve a result that meets their personal definition of good at the time they are making their decision. In addition to the lack of clarity in the term good, the actions a person chooses don't happen in a vacuum. When external forces interfere with a plan, bad things happen.
This video comes from Velaction's Lean Training System, which takes a module-based approach to learning about continuous improvement. Modules include a PowerPoint presentation and student guides for every video, plus there are many exercises and quizzes as well. There's also a whole host of supporting content in the form of terms in our Continuous Improvement Companion and downloadable articles. Our modules are currently available in our store and as downloads at Velaction Videos. Click the links in the description below or click on the cards that pop up on this video to learn more. We'll also add links at the end.
So, as a leader, understanding this chain that links events to results is one of the keys to managing change effectively. Hopefully, seeing the progression of a person's thought process laid out visually like this will highlight where you can focus your energy to have the best chance of achieving more successful results. And that place is the interpretation step. The reason is really relatively simple. Leaders don't control the initial events as much as team members think they do. And once a person forms an emotional response to their interpretation, it is very hard to make a person feel differently. Remember the last key point? Emotion trumps logic. When people are making decisions based on feelings, facts and data have far less sway. So, if a leader can help a person come to a positive conclusion about an event, getting good results for both that person and the company is much less of an uphill battle. Let's now take a look at a real situation regarding change. A few years ago, there was a big legal battle about government subsidies for the production of a particular chemical. This compound is used in the production of a variety of industrial products, including solvents and antifreeze. Surprisingly, it is also even used as a food additive. The problem was that this chemical caused a great deal of damage in both financial terms and in terms of the human toll. There was a lot of public pressure around this chemical, dihydrogen monoxide. If you are like many people, after hearing about DMO, as this chemical is commonly called, you may have made an interpretation followed by an emotional response. Ultimately, most people want to see the subsidies end. Well, at least they do until they actually see the chemical by its more common name, water. It's pretty clear from this example that partial information can drive a very strong emotional response. In this teaching case, obviously the information was carefully crafted to drive a particular feeling. It probably won't be so blatant when you go through changes, but there will be a filtering of information. People have a tendency to focus more heavily on information that supports their views and discount the information that refutes it. The way a message is crafted has a big influence on how a person will respond to a change. So what's the takeaway? It's what you might expect. The more relevant information a person has before they latch onto a choice, the better the outcome generally is. There's the old adage that knowledge is power, but in change management, it is actually the sharing of knowledge that holds power. As a leader, you certainly don't want to withhold information, but you do want to manage the delivery of facts. If you don't tell the whole story, people will hear about the contrapoints from a person who might not be as vested in the success of the project as you are. So what's a good focal point when trying to adjust interpretation? Job satisfaction. In a continuous improvement environment, change becomes commonplace. And that change affects a person's job satisfaction. This picture comes from my book, What Do You Mean I Gotta Be Lean? Building the Bridge from Job Satisfaction to Corporate Profit. I call this the satisfaction contraption. Simply put, it's a scale that weighs all the good stuff in a job against all the bad stuff. Everything that happens is a block that goes into one of the two buckets. Some of the blocks are permanent and stay in the buckets forever. And some are temporary. The impact melts away over time. In this image, the examples are a free lunch last week and a recent argument with a coworker. Both of these tend to have short-term impacts on satisfaction, but most people could not remember these sorts of things from the previous year. If the bad stuff blocks pile up faster than they melt, it's a problem. But most people can tolerate some small incidents without lasting setbacks to job satisfaction. The must-haves at the bottom are exactly what they sound like. Everybody has a few absolute requirements in their jobs. Without them in the proper places, people never achieve job satisfaction. As a leader, one of your jobs is to help your people manage their scales. And to do that, you have to have a good understanding of what they view as positive and negative about their job. Keep in mind that each person's bucket is different. One employee may love overtime and consider it a good stuff block. Another employee may recently have had a child and may dislike staying late. The takeaway is that the things that affect change management are very similar to the things that affect job satisfaction. As a result, the approach to managing both is very similar. One good leadership practice is to build incremental commitment to change. In effect, instead of trying to give a person a huge block that they have to fit into one of their buckets, you're offering them up much smaller blocks that can be tailored to individual needs. A big block that is not fully understood might be looked at negatively, while a small, targeted change may be accepted, making people more inclined to eventually accept the whole change. There's actually some science behind this. In a 2009 study, it was shown that people add weight to the choices they have already made. Basically, if you scored a decision a 6 during the decision-making process, once you commit to it, it becomes a 7. So if a person commits to a series of small decisions, each one reinforces the previous ones, making changes easier to manage. The way a person thinks about change is influenced by a number of factors. The specific project or situation plays a big role in that change. There are several one-time factors that link to the change in question: the cost-benefit balance, the risk of failure, how easy the project is to understand, how obvious the need is, and how easy people expect the change to be. Leaders tend to have the most control over the project factors. As a result, these are the easiest to manage. More difficult to manage are the underlying factors that are constantly present within a company or organization. Things like corporate culture and ongoing relationships between bosses and employees play a major role in change. These are the long-haul factors. Good, strong leaders don't just think about the change at hand. They think about how to manage the organization to create an environment that can flourish in the face of an ongoing series of changes. Even with a great project that's clearly of benefit, these underlying company factors can jeopardize success. But not all factors are on the shoulders of the company. There are some personal factors that will affect how change goes down. While age and background can fall into protected classes, they do play a role in how a person responds to changing situations. Tread carefully around these subjects, though. You have to treat everyone fairly. Tailoring leadership styles to match personalities is okay, but if it is done based on demographics, you can create a dissatisfied team in a hurry, not to mention the potential legal problems. Education and training also plays a role in receptiveness to change. People accept change more readily when they feel prepared for it. If a person feels they have the skills to succeed after the change, they are more likely to be in favor of it. While a leader can't change a person's age or background, he or she can affect this personal factor by doing things like providing training. For the bottom right factor, genetics, the jury is still out. There's some indication that people can be genetically predisposed to things like happiness and acceptance of change. Regardless of whether these tendencies are genetically based or a product of environment, though, when they are recognized, they can be managed. Think of it like a fair-skinned person going to the beach. He can still do it, but it just takes some precautions.
Thanks for watching this extended free version of our Lean Training System module video. If you want to watch the whole video, check it out at Valaction Videos. If you want to make sure you don't miss the next LTS video that we post, please be sure to subscribe down below. We also always appreciate likes as it helps us get viewed more and makes us keep adding additional content. Thanks for watching, and best wishes on your continuous improvement journey.